Hi everyone, I'm Julie Martinez Hayes from Wake Tech, and I'll be covering the Security Fundamentals Chapter 1. This is the second half of the course CTI-120, and we are covering a new book. So make sure you have the correct version of the textbook. It is the second edition, and the color is slightly different than the first edition. It'll say second edition right under the name over lower left. We also have the PDF, so you don't need to have the book, just like the first half of our course. The PDF is provided and is available in several places in Blackboard. So this half tends to be easier because they are more familiar topics, more familiar vocabulary, and less math, to be honest. So most folks enjoy the second half. Also, the labs are fabulous. I love the labs in the second half. They are eye-opening to many people and are a lot of fun to see what you can do in a computer and not be visible. So this is basically intro to hacking, very simple stuff, products that are out there that have free trials and that we will play with, like the Keylogger lab in our first chapter. But they tend to be more fun, to be honest. Okay, the first chapter of this textbook covers basic security layers. Yes, it's not quite as bad as the OSI layers, but there are some different layers where we deal with different types of security, physical security, perimeter security, things like that, threat modeling. So the overall skills are listed here. We are going to do a little bit of vocabulary, but it's nothing like the first half of the course. So the big questions in security, whether you're evaluating your own home or you're evaluating a client who has paid you to look at their security setup, is what is it you're trying to protect? Are you protecting the computer equipment, or the data, or the employees, or all of the above? And where are those things kept? What are your biggest weaknesses? What are the vulnerabilities? So we talk about the vulnerabilities and the flaws of the design of an operation. Now this could simply be the fact that places that might need more security don't have it, and some of that's by design to encourage foot traffic to their business. For example, the bank does not ensure that you are a customer before you're allowed to go up to the drive-up window. You might want to start a new account. So there are pros and cons to all of it, costs and benefits, and usually they account for security and convenience. Those are the two trade-offs. All right, the layers. We're talking about the defense in depth. So defense in depth is the philosophy that you are looking at various layers of your organization. You're going to challenge each one with a certain mindset and a set of questions to figure out if it's good enough and what might you be doing wrong. Are the policies good enough? So the policies are actually part of the administrative layer. The physical is the first layer. So the first physical layer is, how do you get in the door? How do you physically get to the place? So we have different chapters listed here on this slide about which one shows up where. It looks like the word malware is not appearing. That little red spiky blob in the lower corner, lesson 5, that is malware. So that'll be fun. Looking at malware, we don't get to write malware, thank you, but it's really not that hard. So simplistic things, just realize that when you write these things, whatever you target could turn around and sue you and charge you with something. So although writing a ping command that ends up being a distributed denial of service might be simple to do, it's also illegal. So you're using resources, you're sucking up resources and costing money to whatever organization is damaged and whoever's supplying the internet to it. Okay, so be careful. Basic security terms, we have a few acronyms we have to deal with, and one is CIA and AAA. CIA is confidentiality, integrity, and availability, which are listed oddly on this slide. So basically, authentication is proving who you are. That's the identity. We've got to look at who you are and how you prove who you say you are. Confidentiality is looking at the data and the resources to make sure only those folks who need to get to it actually get to it. We all don't need to see everybody's grades, for example, and there are regulations for that called FERPA. Integrity is the data being true. It has not been tampered with. It's exactly how you left it. All right, so CIA, and it is easy to remember. If you remember the letters and go back, confidentiality, the permitted people only have to get to see it. Integrity is that it's true to form and not been tampered with. And availability is actually kind of bigger than you think it is. It's the data being available when they promise it 100% of the time that they say it will be available. And there are some caveats to all these terms. Confidentiality is permitted users, and permitted doesn't always mean that everyone who gets access are those who need access. That's sort of on the policy side of things, where folks who really don't need to be reading these files actually do have permission to read these files. But confidentiality means that your design is true and you don't have any unauthorized access, which can happen from service accounts, it can happen from open ports, it can happen from software having, there are just many things wrong with software. Anything web-based can have ways to do inserts and data penetration to get in and act like a different user and end up seeing data or pulling it out. That is the problem with data and data breaches, of how to get in and using valid user accounts sort of to do it. Which is why when we get to the whole who should have access, that's a really good question. We want that tighter, more stringent than we need it to be. So the technology should be preventing the errors, and we always are on the side of caution to ensure that users who don't really need to do that don't have access. All right, the other thing that we can do to ensure confidentiality, bump up your requirements, make things encrypted, make sure people don't get to restricted databases via open public networks, maybe VPN channel only. Stronger authentication so that passwords can't be hacked in 30 days, make it much, much harder, so that the time it would take to hack is at least double the time it takes before the password expires. And any kind of stringent access control you add, the more the better. Your data is valuable, your customer lists are valuable, what you charge a customer is valuable, even the price of something would be more valuable than you think because your competitor can underbid you. All right, integrity. All right, the simple word, but meaning it's accurate data, it's consistent, how it was left, it is valid. So ways to do this are to audit who has access, who has been in this folder recently, who has changed the file. Make sure that is being audited so you can track it. Also, you can hash the files, which means that a mathematical formula is done on it to create a hash signature, and if it's changed, then someone's messed with the file. So it's a tampering prevention. And again, the AAA of authentication, authorization, and accounting, which is do we really know who you are, and can we make that tougher to prove? Who is authorized to get to this, and we can make that more stringent. And the accounting of who reviews this every once in a while. So how do we know that a user account for someone who left isn't still open and someone's still using it? Why is it still available? More importantly, who's using it? Is it the user who no longer works there, or is it someone else just hacking in with those credentials? Some key things. Availability. This is a little tricky because resources need maintenance. So you need to publish maintenance windows and advertise, warn users on a regular basis, preferably have that maintenance window the same day and time each week, like a Friday night or a late Saturday night, and just say it is not available between 9 and 11. So warning, Friday night, go spend time with your friends and family and don't expect to work. As long as it's predictable and we have this on a regular basis, with enough time, you can train users to realize, oh, I have to get off the system before 9. So maintenance windows aside, availability is the system staying up and running. So with the system being up, you would say, well, was there was there a hardware failure? Was there a network failure, like a switch failed? Was there an outage, a fiber outage or a fiber cut due to construction nearby? All of those things will affect availability, and the way to handle that is to have a second server that does the same job. Right? There's always a way to have duplication. Right? A couple of types, they break down the availability or the threat to availability in two ways, two types. Accidental, which just means, hey, the equipment broke, things went bad. And then the deliberate is more exploitative. This is more malicious. This is someone saying, yeah, I want to take this server down. It's finals week, and I want to make sure no one gets into Blackboard. That's the deliberate threat to availability. Both are serious threats, and both have to have planning, that both require planning to avoid. Okay, you want fault tolerance. You want to make sure there's another server somewhere at a different site, so the power cut would not affect the backup server. You want to have redundant web servers hosting Blackboard. Ours is now hosted by Blackboard, so you know darn well they have a server farm hosting all their sites, and if one goes down, so another server just jumps right into place. Privacy and security. We have to deal with the fact that this information is not only needs to be secure, but it needs to be private to you, and you need to be able to control it. And I think too often we say, yeah, sure, you can have my student ID, no problem, here's the information. When in fact, most of us need to stop and think just who is getting our information and how we can be found a different way. Never give out your social security number, we know that. And yet it's tax time, so folks are going to be giving it to their tax preparers and to the IRS or people that sound like the IRS, and collections, third-party collectors for the IRS. They're all going to get that information. All right, so secure privacy is how you share it and how you can control it being shared. Security is to make sure that the places where it's kept are secure and that you're relying on an IT department and policies and software writers to do their job and with security in mind. And that starts from the very design of a network and the first line of code of the software. PII is what we generally worry about, and yet Facebook is smothered with it. Personally identifiable information are common things like your mother's maiden name and your birth date, and it may not be quite so obvious as a social security number, but many of the information that asked for in simple social media memes starts with something very personal that can be used to recover an account. Biometric is harder, again, but email, if I had your email account or if someone used my email by accident and they sent the recovery code, I could then recover and reset the password to whatever account they're trying to get into. It's happened. Julie Martinez is a common name. I receive email from about 8 different people, and it includes school things, bridal invitations, like bridesmaid hair setting appointment confirmations. I hope that lady showed up. I get all kinds of weird email because the names are similar, and sometimes I get the recovery codes for accounts that are not mine. It's tempting. I can order a pizza for a lady in Antonio if I want to. Anyway, so we have to be very careful with the stuff that gets out and be a lot more protective of it. We've been tossing a couple of words around and haven't properly defined them, and that's threat versus risk. Risk isn't the negative word people think it is. Risk is both the good and the bad. It just means probability. That's really all it means. It's chance. It's the numerical probability of something happening, and that could be a great thing or a horrible thing. So what is the probability of winning the lottery? Pretty crappy since I don't play it. What's the probability that your hard drive will crash? Pretty high since it's going to happen anyway. So what happens when that drive crashes? Well, you have to rely on your backup. So I hope you have one. And what are the consequences of me winning the lottery? Extended vacation once I'm allowed to travel again. All right, threat is something different. It's the actual action. The action that results in the loss of data, loss of hardware, loss of time. Anytime work is lost, that means time was lost, and we paid someone to do that work. So every data loss, even if it's something like a Word document posted on a wall, it took someone time to create it, to print it, and now we have to redo it. All right, so everything has kind of a dollar amount associated with it. The threat can be something we know about and something we don't know is down the road. So it's harder to figure out exactly what all the threats are, but there are ways to ask certain questions and find out. Risk, again, was probability, and then the vulnerability is the flaw that is attacked. So it could be a weakness in software. It could be something as simple as a receptionist or a front desk security guard who is not forward enough to stop everyone who walks by. I have to stop and say, who are you? Why are you here? Why don't you have to sign in and get a guest badge? And if you don't have the front desk, the front person doing that, that gatekeeper person doing that, then that's a vulnerability right there. That's a flaw, all right, in the system. Risk management is the process we go through to figure out what the risks are, figure out the probabilities that might happen, what are the biggest flaws and vulnerabilities in the system, the network, and what are we going to do about it? So we have to assess it. We have to do the analysis to figure out what we own, where is it, does it need patching, are there too many administrative level accounts, and that's as simple as at your home checking that all the doors are locked. Okay, at the end of the day, do you check that all the doors are locked? Does anyone ever check that the windows are locked? Okay, that's the identifying and assessing. Now, what you do about it's going to be totally different, and that depends on cost, what the budget to work with might be, and also how much hassle do you want folks to go through to work at your place or to buy your product? You know, what is it that you're doing as a job? And how much hassle do you want to go through before preventing them to come in? So once you've taken all those measures that you can afford that seem reasonable, what's left over? That's the residual risk. So you've already have a backup server, you have it in a different location, you have extra security guard, you've got badge access. Now, at that point, what is the residual risk that you will lose server time and sales from your web servers? Risk assessments. Risk assessments is the process we use to not only identify the risk, but figure out how often it might happen. For example, the 100-year flood has the 100 years on it for a reason, that it is the probability, which means the risk, of it happening is, once every 100 years. Now, what happens if you plan for a 100-year flood and it happens every 2 years? You haven't planned properly and you need to change your plan. Okay, so we have to look at the chances of it happening and how to mitigate it, prioritize it, figure out what the cost is to deal with it, and then what's left over. And at some point you might say, yeah, that might happen, and I'm just going to have to accept the risk. And that deals with the responses to risk and how we handle the risk. So the first choice would be to avoid it entirely. And then with avoidance, acceptance, mitigation, and transfer. These are 4 key words. They're in bold. They're in the quiz pool. You need to know them. So we're going to go through them one by one. And if you think about what are the chances of being in a car accident, and then these words kind of make more sense. For avoidance, that's pretty obvious. You're going to choose not to engage in that activity. So it might be using the public Wi-Fi at Starbucks. You might just turn your laptop's Wi-Fi off and use the hotspot from your phone and use the cellular signal to get through. And that way you're not sharing all your data with the folks in the coffee shop. An acceptance would be just saying, yeah, that's going to happen. Someone in the coffee shop might have it. So I will choose not to grade and not to write exams, but I might just answer some email. Okay. Worst case scenario, they get the password to my email. Or you might just do something totally safe and just surf for a little while. But that's a choice. It's a choice you make by realizing there's risk in this activity, so what am I going to do about it? I'm going to avoid this activity, and then I'm going to accept there might still be some. Now, mitigation is what you do to handle and avoid and prevent. So you're preventing that threat from happening. So let's say you would buy a VPN product from whoever you're paying for your malware protection. And so you're going to be in the coffee shop, you have to write the exam, you have to do the grading, but you don't want anyone to see it, so you used your VPN tool. The VPN then encrypts all the data, nobody can see it, and you can keep working at the coffee shop. Transfer of risk is a little bit tougher when it comes to data, but transfer is like your car insurance. You avoid paying for the repair by paying for insurance, and they pay for the repair. So it's basically, transfer is just passing the buck. So how are you going to pass the buck if it's data and you're in the coffee shop? That's a little bit tougher to do. But you might say insure the laptop, so if the laptop were to be stolen, then you could get your costs back. The least privilege is the concept that people would have only the bare minimum permission and privileges to do a task and not more than that, so that you're compartmentalizing tasks to ensure that someone is approving the work. You're preventing a person from doing an entire task start to finish, but you're also making sure that another pair of eyes, another system, another group help okay the process to make sure the process is legit. So for example, if I had to buy 24 computers for a classroom, we're setting up a new lab room and we need 24 computers. But I also have these 3 new users who just got hired and they don't have computers, so for my classroom order, I'm just going to pad it a little bit, 24 for the room, 1 for a replacement, and then 3 for the new people. So I can just make it, bump it up a little bit, 28, 29, I can just round up a little bit and no one will notice. It'll come out of the classroom budget. Well, someone who has to approve that is going to say, no, the classroom has 24, you can buy 24. And that's a separation of duties that help that. So by not giving the person requesting the 24 computers the permission to authorize the funds, you're slowing the process down, but you're also preventing fraud. You're ensuring there is no fraud and that the money set aside for employee computers is spent on employee computers and the money set aside for classrooms is spent on classrooms. It is inconvenient, and that is by design. Security and convenience usually go total opposite of each other. When you have more of one, you have less of the other. All right, HIPAA. We do have, why is HIPAA mentioned on this slide? HIPAA it's a structural design so that not everyone can see the medical information. They can see only exactly what they need to see and not more. So my doctor may be able to see my medications, but can't always see my insurance and billing issues. The billing people can see the billing related stuff, but can't identify the medical issues or the doctor's notes or the doctor's conversations with me. So by separating that out, and all of that is forbidden to be given out to, say, family members without my permission, because that's my personal information and I want to protect it. And HIPAA does that. Every business scenario, whether it's a school or it's how you operate your home, you'll see the principle of least privilege built in there somewhere. So who makes the request for the food and the groceries, and who's actually going to buy it, and who's doing the shopping for it, and how are you going to allocate how much is spent? Because, you know, if you're going to buy the groceries at a big box store, I'm just going to throw in some extra games or a tablet or something more fun. So we separate these out. Least privilege also comes into play with newly hired people, because even though they might have the same title as someone who's been there for 5 years, they're not going to have all the privileges quite yet. So the new hires have different access, and people, when that changes, they get promoted, then they would lose the access they had before and get the access of the new position. So the privilege changes over time, and what group they're in makes a difference. This is going to be a huge issue because least privilege, is implemented by giving permissions to groups. We don't give permissions directly to the users, we create groups. We cover this in Chapter 2 quite a bit, but you'll have to know at least what the topic of least privilege is and how to set it up. But we'll get into the details of the tasks and how to do it in Chapter 2. So the whole purpose is to give groups, which means the entire group has the same access, and another group would have the different access. It certainly happens that people are members of multiple groups, so that happens. But by having standard groups with a prefab title and type and role and task that they do, then you can more easily control who's in what group and which group does what part of the task. So least privilege relies on the fact that you would have separation of duties built into your organization. Again, the purchase of the 24 computers for the classroom is kind of a classic example, that one person requests it, someone else might research it and decide what type of computer, and a different person puts the budget number on there that makes it this exact one for the classroom expenditures, and someone else entirely might actually place the order. So it's all to prevent errors and fraud, both. The more eyes that see this process, the more chance they can make a correction. Say, oh, you need to have speakers on this, or is this lab going to need cameras? So what exactly do you need? What software are you going to run? Oh, you're going to need more RAM for that. That kind of second thought, second pair of eyes is essential to this process. This is just a visual of how that whole process works, of who's authorizing it, double checking it, and then it gets verified. The accountant, the auditor would then verify and go back later after the fact and verify that 24 computers were purchased for this classroom, and if 25 computers were purchased, where's the 25th one? Where did it go? What's happening to it? And you could say, oh, well, yeah, I forgot to order the podium computer, so we added it to this order. They would catch the fact that 28 computers wouldn't fit in the classroom. The attack surface is defined as a set of methods and avenues an attacker can use to enter a system or potentially cause damage. We're going to get into the 3 types in greater detail. There are different amounts of attack surface. The 3 areas that we study are application, network, and employee. And the employee by far is the greater risk and the greater attack surface, because anything involving humans is prone to error, but also prone to manipulation, and that's the big problem. So, attack surface analysis involves looking at documenting, digging into the details of applications, hardware, user accounts, people, what their roles are, what their access is, what's the password minimum length required, and why does this person have administrative rights when they really don't need that. So it's a tedious process to do the analysis. There is software to help for much of it, but we still have to take a step back away from the computers and look at the bigger picture, such as the doors. Where are the doors and how many get locked during the day? What happens when everyone goes to lunch? Who checks the doors at the end of the day? And who double checks the doors? Okay, so this is all part of an analysis. And you would make a script of things you need to check. So not only do you check the hardware, you check the serial number, you check the PO it came from, you check what operating system it is and what patches it has. So it's not enough to say Windows 10, we need to know the build number. And make a database, so all those things and what the weaknesses are. So for the application of those three components, the application attack surface is very general, and the biggest one is the amount of code. The increased number of lines of code, the bigger the app, the more chance for flaws. And anyone who's written 2 lines of code knows this. So also the number of services running to run this application, more services running, which means more credentials might be running in the background, more opportunities to manipulate that service to do something malicious. Ports, again, is this application only using port 80, or is it using 5 different ports for different parts of the process? So all of that needs to be taken into account. And it's important to know that not just what ports are in use, but what ports are listening, because when a port is listening, it's receptive to commands and controls. Listening ports are a much, much bigger vulnerability than anything that's closed and just waiting to be used from the inside of the network. Data inputs of an application are one element of its vulnerability, an option for vulnerability. How many times does this app prompt the user for data? And what happens if the data is in an incorrect format? What kind of data correction, data trapping, are we coding it and formatting it, or can we pad that thing with extra commands? If we wrote an entire command in the space that says last name, would it actually run that command? All right, that's why data inputs are considered a weakness, a potential flaw. The network attack surface is pretty common sense, and you studied a lot of this in the first half of the network in terms of what you would need to check. But the first line in the book that discusses this makes me laugh, because the overall design of a network, that's network architecture in a nutshell. And we could talk for weeks about network architecture. That's a huge topic. Some simple questions like, is the guest Wi-Fi separate from the internal employee Wi-Fi? Does the guest Wi-Fi require a password or credentials of any kind? Is it even announced? So, or would you have to go to an employee and say, what's the Wi-Fi around here? And someone would give you the name of it and perhaps give you the password. How often is the password checked? Where physically are the systems that hold most of your data? How are they protected? How do you know who's gone in the room? Firewall settings, you looked at a lot of firewall rules and created firewall rules. So who evaluates those, and who double checks that? Who reviews that every year to make sure what's there is necessary? And where's the documentation as why that opened port is necessary? So someone should say, this is necessary because Julie Martinez Hayes needs it several times a year when she runs the Certiport software and administers these exams. It can be closed for the other dates, but when she requests that it be opened and the software be updated, don't forget to go open this port. Also, what rules do you have on in-house as to VPN use? Is it required, or do you avoid allowing anyone into the network entirely? And once they're in the network, how are you going to find out? So what will tell you that someone got into the network without permission, or someone put in the incorrect password 10 times, but the 11th time worked? All right, so you have any systems tracking that. Policy servers, there are always network policy servers in use, but they're expensive. So not everyone's going to be able to afford that. Smaller companies can't afford that. But it's one option where throwing more money at a problem could fix it, but there might be other ways to mitigate it and say, well, we can make it less of a problem. We can't afford the network policy server. The biggest one is the employee attack surface. Again, this could be a whole course in itself. Users are always the biggest risk, and manipulation is the #1 reason. We tend to try to believe what we see, and we tend to assume the best of people. I know not everyone in this class does, but generally if we see someone we don't know, we assume they are not out to harm us right away. That's not our first impression, but they're just another person at the same grocery store, in the same parking lot, buying the same hamburger, and they're not going to, they're not going to be a problem. And that's just not always the case when it comes to networks. So for networks, it is a tricky balance to be polite and say, "Hi, who are you here to see? May I see your ID? Please come over and get a guest badge," and sign in for a guest badge. But there are ways to be stricter and in some cases slope someone down and cause an inconvenience to them to secure their network, but still be polite about it. Social engineering is tough also because the email, it can come in different forms, and email can promise wonderful things like the UPS package you've been waiting for, and the Amazon thing you ordered 3 weeks ago finally is here. Or it could scare you and say, "Oh, someone seems to be trying to recover the password to your bank account. Can you please confirm that you are in charge of your bank account?" And they provide a link. All right, it could be quite malicious. Boundaries for attack surface. There are different boundaries for inside your network, and also can be outside your network because it's coming from outside your network. Obviously, you can't document and read logs for the entire internet, but you can separate traffic to see who's trying to come inside the network from out, or for going from which side to which side. So is it coming from RTP to south? Is it coming from RTP's classroom to an odd server at a different campus that's not usually in use? You can just set up a firewall to review some of this traffic and at least analyze it to point it out to you. So these are filters. You're looking at traffic filters. 2 keywords here, obviously bolded words, most likely in the quiz pool. Ingress and egress. And I see a lot of folks confuse these two terms. Here's the easy way. Ingress is coming into your network, begins with in. Egress is exiting your network and begins with E for exit. And that's it. So ingress traffic, it means it's starting from outside. This is not a response to your request from inside, so it's the beginning is outside the network, like your home computer trying to get to the work computer on your desk. So the traffic originated from outside the network. Egress traffic starts from inside your network, and it might involve a reply, but that reply still is responding to a request that originated on the inside. That's the catch where people generally make the mistake. Amazon sending a website into your computer's browser is usually egress traffic because the request to Amazon to shop for boots started from inside the network. Right? You asked for a listing of boots from Amazon, and Amazon is replying and saying, "Here's the list." Okay, so egress traffic can originate but then have a reply. Ingress traffic originates, there is no one requesting it from the inside. It's just Amazon randomly decides it's going to pick on you and display some listing of boots. Okay, that's just not going to happen. Or it shouldn't. It might, but it shouldn't. Okay. The other thing for analyzing logs, this is the biggest issue for network attack surface, is turning on the auditing to see what's going on and then go review the logs. The logs and filters on firewall traffic, filters on Wireshark to see what's actually going on, security logs on all the computers. This is what's going to show you what's really happening on a computer. But you'd have to turn on the auditing for it first. So unless you turn on auditing for missed passwords, you won't know how many times someone is trying to hack into an account. With more of the analysis, we have ports to deal with. Again, the open ports. Why are they open? Let's test to see which ones are open. Which ones are open on this workstation? Not just the web server, but all the servers and all the computers. Because maybe someone in accounting decided they're taking a web development class, and somehow they managed to install IIS and they're hosting web pages through their Windows 10 computer. Didn't know they could do that, right? It can be done. So you want to test which ports are open and in use and where the traffic is coming from on all the computers. You can't just stop with it. Also the traffic, what's encrypted, of course, we already covered the encrypted. And the policies, the human element, what are people allowed to do? Technically, because the computer is there and the ports are open, versus what are they permitted to do with the rules. The rules and the technology don't always coincide. So I can say you are banned from hosting a website on your Windows 10 computer. Is that going to prevent you from actually doing it? Not really. It could just say, this is the punishment, you will be fired. But if there's nothing technically allowing, forbidding you to install it and configure it, then your policies and your technology are out of sync. And sometimes that's just going to be the case for cost reasons. But the review has to happen periodically. It can't just happen once. The training of the users on what malware and phishing emails and how to protect a front entrance and challenge people in a polite way to say, I'm sorry, I don't know you. Who are you here to see? That takes training, it takes practice, and it has to be repeated. Hardening operating systems means making it tougher, making it more difficult to get in, to change any accounts. Now here's the kicker. You can have a lot of accounts that are not in use, and oftentimes they're disabled, but you can enable an account with a simple PowerShell command and reset the password. So someone has to know that these accounts are disabled. They can have expiration dates so that even if you did enable them, they were only enabled from the window that they were allowed to function, and that has already passed. So there's several ways to make user accounts tougher. The easiest one is the password. Make it frequently changed, so the time it takes before it expires should be fairly short, and make it a long and complicated password with no dictionary words. Passphrases are becoming more passé. We need auto-generated passwords, and how you're going to remember it, good luck. But if that's not going to work for some people, the passphrase or pass sentence will work very well. The example, if you go to any password checker to see how tough your password is, and you type in the sentence, I need a vacation, capital I space, need space vacation, and then you have to add a number in there somewhere and put an exclamation point so you have a special character. Despite the fact that all of those are dictionary words, the length of it makes it a fairly tough password. But you'd have to require it. You can't count on the users doing it on their own. You have to make it a minimum standard, and that's where the policies come in. With threat modeling, we're going to look at how to examine a network. Hold on. We're going to look at how to examine a network, how to go through, analyze the vulnerabilities and risks. Okay, the whole phrase for that is called threat modeling, and then we're going to have to list out what we're going to do as a response, and which one's the worst. All right, this is an iterative process, which means it has to happen multiple times. The book talks about having multiple passes because every time you go through and do the same analysis, you're going to find something else. And the truth is, you need multiple people doing these multiple passes because two different sets of eyes are much, much better. But if you work as a team and you realize, oh, I don't want this other person catching something that I skipped, people tend to work harder. A little bit of competition, a little bit of embarrassment, and people will take more time. They slow down doing the analysis. So it really works well working in teams of 2 or 3, where all 3 of you go through the same analysis and come up with different results. It's truly helpful. With threat modeling, there are a couple of steps you need to follow, and different organizations have acronyms to help with it. The basic steps, you have to look at what your assets are, figure out what's connected to what. I'm a huge fan of Visio, folks using the Visio software that you get for free from Microsoft, and look at how things are connected. This is important for a server room, for where the routers are and how the switches connect to the routers. It's also important in your home network with the data closet, so you folks know which device there is the Spectrum device, so I know which thing to restart if the internet goes out I know which device is which. Is it labeled? Is there a document somewhere? Are you keeping track of how often it needed to get restarted? So there needs to be some sort of documentation, a logic flow to it, so you can tell what connects to what. Then you need to tear apart the components. You really have to break apart the components, what's on it. So you need the Cisco person to look at the switch and find out, research the vulnerabilities of that iOS that's on that switch. You need the NOS person looking at the operating systems, users, someone who's familiar with the users and the weaknesses there with group policy to analyze the group policy weaknesses. So it's over and over, different layers. And then all of it has to get documented. There has to be summary, and then there have to be proposed solutions and costs. What's the biggest risk, and how are we going to fix it, and how much will that cost? And then, well, why is this the biggest problem? What are the consequences if it happens? What are the consequences? How much, are we lose everything? Do we go out of business? Does everything shut down? So you have to think longer term, not just scour through operating systems looking for patches. Okay, STRIDE is the acronym used by Microsoft. Stands for spoofing. I'm trying to do this without reading the slides. Spoofing, tampering, you never get the R. Oops. Repudiation, info disclosure, denial of service, and I forgot the E. Elevation. Okay, see? So this takes time to memorize. I did not memorize this before doing this video, and it takes a little while. Some of them make more common sense, like spoofing. What can be spoofed? A MAC address can be spoofed, email address. How can they get in, and how do we prevent it? So that third column on the right is what you can do to reduce the risk of this thing happening. MAC addresses are going to be a different one that says authentication is the solution here. There is a reverse DNS, so you can look at, is this URL really Amazon.com, or is it really the source I think I'm going to? So there's several options within each one. This quick chart just lists out one, but if you got into the details of how to prevent spoofing, it would take a while. Just be lucky you don't have to cover all of that in this chapter. That comes up in NOS 130 and 230. DREAD is another acronym doing some similar things, but I like this one better because it's looking at more practical things. The previous one looks at issues that are scattered in terms of where it falls in the layers. DREAD looks at the risk levels, the threats, and potential threats, a little more commonsensical in terms of what thought process is required here. So one of the things I really like about DREAD here is the R. Instead of repudiation, it's reproducibility. So how easy is this to make happen? And once it's done, can it happen again? Or is it once it's done and it's done? That 100-year flood, it can happen again. So put your servers in higher buildings. It can be something as simple as that, really. So what's the damage potential? And it can be everything from weather to fire to malicious people. So that's a huge list right there. And then each one of those items, you would go through the other part of the list of reproducibility, exploitability, the affected users, and discoverability. So once it's happened, how are you going to know about it? And that is one of the questions you would ask and give a grade to, you give a score to, and you do a summary with an actual number. And once it's numerical, you can compare one threat versus another, what the outcome, the potential outcome, what to fix easily and what to fix by throwing a lot of money at because it's a bigger issue. Just remember that security costs money, but also all the work that you're doing also has a cost as well. How many hours did it take to write that English paper? And how much money could you have earned at your job instead of writing that English paper? Okay, so there's a cost-benefit analysis to time itself. Time is money, and security is money. So they are oftentimes one and the same, because security takes effort, which means you have IT staff and users putting in the effort. You've got users doing the training. You've got the IT staff often conducting the training, and you've got products you could purchase that help improve your network. For example, you add more firewalls, and you could make them hardware firewalls instead of software firewalls, so you have redundancy. The training is the biggest issue with the users, and helping to explain what happens when people have short passwords. One of the biggest issues is users complaining about longer passwords and how often they're changed, or how many times they have to enter in different passwords for different systems. Well, you can fix that a number of ways by having certificates that pass the password and credentials through. That's less hassle for the users, the number of times they enter a password, or different systems that have passwords. And to make up for that, it's like, well, we're going to keep the longer password requirement, but we're just going to let you use the same one on different systems and have certificates handle the authentication for us. Social engineering is a big topic again. It's based on the trust of human beings. It's also based on fear. So you play off emotions, off of human error, and a lot of assumptions. If you see someone in a brown truck with a brown uniform scurrying to every front door, you'd assume it's a UPS person. Not always the case, but there are assumptions to be made, right? So social engineering is a way to manipulate users. It usually involves misrepresentation of some kind. It can be done in different formats. So it can be in person, saying, "Oh, I just need to get to that back room there. I'm the electrician. I'm going to fix something." And email, or could be an email or over the phone. And usually it's for someone presenting themselves as in person that's a worker, and oftentimes there's no bullying involved because they sweet talk their way in. If network theft seems a little simplistic, but it can be more difficult to be consistent about. We tend to get a little lazy with network security with our actual devices. So network theft can be data, it can be hardware, it can be numerous things. It can be someone's contacts. There is an entertaining, very entertaining, it's 40 minutes long and it's worth it. There are some F-bombs, just to warn you. This video below of someone who is a professional white hat hacker and black hat hacker at night. He's got to have a dual job with opposite roles, and he's done some fascinating things to get into a network. Be careful with what information you give out, be careful what people you let in, and then there's the obvious of just making sure that the doors are closed, locked, things are secure. That's actually physical security. That's a different type of security. That physical security would be the subset of who's allowed in. That could even be in the parking lot. You could have a gated parking lot. Who is allowed in the building, and within that building it could be who's allowed in this section of the building and the complex. There are a lot of ways to do it. So badges, passwords, key passes, little codes on doors, all of that is part of physical security. There's several ways of doing it, and from the operating system perspective, hold on. You done? Okay. There are several ways of doing physical security, and it can be pretty high-end and expensive, or it can be very simple, like making sure someone just checks on the doors. We have cameras installed, and we're restricting who is allowed to log on to the computers. Access control of who can log on to which computer goes a long way. That way, if someone's had some stolen credentials and they were legitimate credentials, they might not be able to log on to the computers in the outer office area. Okay. This whole concept is called defense in depth. It's a layered system. It's looking at the outer layers, perimeter layers, inner layers, and looking at the physical security as well as network security slightly differently with each one, especially for businesses that are trying to encourage clientele. We want students to come see our campus because they're beautiful campuses, and we want students to come here and see if they're comfortable. They want to see what the commute is, see what's offered. So we're not going to have gates at the parking lots. Besides, that would just lead to major accidents on the nearby roads. So there's outer perimeter that we may keep wide open, but then we might have some other perimeter issues inside the buildings, or maybe just one building, or just a couple of restricted areas. So how you deal with these layers is an issue. There's always the question of what if all people got tired of making different keys, so you had one key that was able to go through all the way through. Someone has a master key and it works at all 5 layers, straight from the outer parking lot door to the server room. That would be a big problem. You need to have those separated out, and that's what defense in depth does. Access control is one area that usually it requires a little bit more time, effort, and money for the software to do it well. It can still be done less well and cheaper. And one example is a picture right on the screen of the combo pad for the door lock. So those are not expensive, but you can have 2 codes, one code, and allow people in. There's also just physical barriers, such as fences, door locks, even the baby gate style of restricting access. Don't come in here. We'll meet you at the desk. Service windows, service desks block physical access. The gold standard is really badge access, and a badge access would be a card that is chipped. Your chip then puts you in certain groups. The group that is allowed access to building A, allowed to build, another group might have building A and B, etc. And the badge would also have a picture ID. If challenged, you could see it. And ideally, you could even add a dual method and say, you have a badge to get in here, but what's the PIN? And add a separate PIN on top of a badge so that someone could have the badge with them. Someone could steal the badge from, say, wherever I went to lunch, but they would have to know what the PIN is to get into the server room, to get to both. So for physical security, what we're really trying to do is to figure out who needs what, how do we prove that they are who they say they are, the access to control of limiting those folks, of the people who are allowed in, and only those people are allowed in, and how do we make sure that's what happened? Who's going to double check that the rules we set up are legit, that we're not allowing too many people in? So we have to be able to audit it and see what's really going on. The access control, that's kind of a design issue. We're going to structure it this way, and what if you find out, well, yeah, but it was so annoying that some of the folks just propped open the back door at lunchtime because it was a pain to go all the way around the building when their desk was right next to the back door. And I've seen that. I've actually seen that in IT departments where the rooms were right near the back door, but you couldn't get in that way. And so they propped it open. Yes, IT staff propped it open. Anyway, so that auditing really helps. It reviews, but it's time consuming. It's really time consuming to look at video camera and look at the logs. Physical premises, again, we had that structure with the layers. Let's looking at perimeters, and as different types of perimeters. You might have noticed on the outer, the defense in depth screen, how you had an external perimeter and an internal perimeter, and some have many, many more. So for the external perimeter, obviously you can do some simple things like cameras and have lights so you can see who is coming and going. And you could always add more, but that's going to come with consequences. So as the consequences are, you're slowing the process down, you're making it a hassle for people to visit you, and like I said with the auditing in the previous slide, the previous step, you can have a lot of footage, but it's tedious to go through it. So unless someone is really taking time to go through it, or they're watching it live. So if you're reviewing footage, that means it already happened. But if you are paying someone to stare at a screen, are they staring at the 13 monitors closely, or are they looking at their phone? So you've got to be careful with who exactly is monitoring the footage and for what reason, and what that's going to cost you. Internal is a little bit easier. You can control who goes where. You can funnel people in certain walkway and say this is the entrance, this is the exit. You can require badge readers, or a receptionist, a security person could flip a switch on the door to allow the door to open. So there are ways to very politely control traffic, and it can be done. Also, there are simple things like smoke detectors and other RFID detectors to see what's going on inside the buildings. The internal space into segments, I forgot to mention that. You want to restrict your physical access to those that really need it, which basically means you are going to have those more secure areas. They're going to involve where your data is, where your proprietary information is, the secret recipe to whatever you're making, and where the money is. So where the accounting and finance are going to be secure, but also if there's any cash intake, people are paying their bills. So that's going to be a highly secure area with a safe, usually it's caged off, with a wind service window, and very difficult to enter. For the physical security, some of the things that keep coming up are biometrics, but in truth, biometrics are not cost effective. It's expensive hardware, it's expensive to maintain, and there are a lot of false negatives as well as false positives. So although biometrics shows up on a lot of these lists, just the reality check, not what the book is saying, but the reality check is that defense in depth will include biometrics, usually for internal perimeter, and often you'll see that for outside doors, but usually on the internal perimeter, and it's a pain and it does not work well. So having a dual method, two-step authentication with something and something you have is usually better off and a lot cheaper to maintain. Those secure areas, the combination keypad is good. Having a security door that automatically closes. There's some basic commonsensical things. Also, we get into later of how to restrict storage and removable storage. So USB, not just flash drives, but USB hard drives with a larger storage. How do you restrict those from even being accepted by the monitor's USB port or the computer's USB port? It's like, yeah, that's not even allowed on the devices. So there are ways to physically secure the area as well as just limit any data that can be copied. The more expensive ones here are actually the intrusion detection. So once you're physically in the building, who's gonna know? So if you manage to get in the building using a key or a pin or something else, is there any way to know that someone's in the building without permission? So without a motion detection or alarm or some alarm of some kind, there's no way that anyone would know the building has been breached. And once the building is breached, it's not too hard to get to the data. Computer security for policies are this includes both physically securing the hardware and how you keep the hardware, how you maintain it, and how every single piece of hardware is an access point to your network. So every time you look at a computer, don't even just think of it as, oh, there's no data on there. Just think of it as that's one more point that someone could log in with 2,000 possible logins and passwords to get to my data. Okay, that's what that is. It's an access point. So there are procedures in place. Some of them you can use group policy to administer, but a lot of times the first question is really, how do I lock this down? How do I keep it from walking away? So classrooms, we have policies where you can't be in a classroom without the teacher. Desktop computers, that's going to help the desktop computers in classrooms. Servers are more expensive. They're going to have stricter rules about who has access and when they're allowed in. And even those who do have access don't always have the key. They might have to request the key from someone. It's the mobile devices that are the biggest problem. People get very comfortable carrying their tablet or laptop around. It's just another thing they have, and oftentimes folks forget that it costs a lot of money, or the software itself costs money, and replacing it would hurt. So how do you keep those mobile devices? And if you have a company with sales, then people are living on those things. What are you going to do with it? Have a cable, attach it to a desk. Cables can be cut, but they're better than nothing, especially if they're in a classroom and the classroom has some sort of video or video in the hallway. Might be able to help slow things down a little bit. But what if you're traveling? If you're traveling and you have a $2,000 laptop that was given to you by the office, what are you going to do with it? And you have to leave the room. Do you take it with you? You should keep it with you as much as possible, or check it in a safe. A lot of places will have safes, or the office will have a safe. Also theft recovery software, GPS on it, and you can put a motion detector on it, so even if it just budges on the desktop, it'll start screaming. So when you've got mobile devices, honestly, keeping them out of visual sight is one of the best ways. If I had to leave it in a hotel room, a valuable computer in a hotel room, and there was no safe, I would just hide it in stuff that looks pretty mundane, like dirty jeans, and no one would look in the pile of clothes, and it wouldn't be visible, it wouldn't be in a drawer, it wouldn't be on top of a desk, and folks tend to not look. It takes more effort, and it avoids temptation by someone who wouldn't normally take it. Same thing for the car. Put it in the trunk and hide it. Be careful about temperature, because in the summertime, the closed car is a temperature at which you could fry your laptop. So you definitely don't want it running, but you really don't want it in a hot car. With removable devices, the biggest issue is USBs, and you've got three separate issues with them. One is just loss. People leave them behind, they leave them in classrooms. What's on it? I've seen many a paper and lab for students who probably wondered where the heck that was. And we try to get it back to them. But if we can't tell who it is, it helps to at least put a phone number on there or something so we can get it back to you. Theft, which means they're deliberately taken and more malicious, and espionage, which is also malicious. Do not underestimate the amount of information that is valuable to a competitor. And like I said earlier, it could simply be what price you are selling a product to a client. How much are you selling eggs for right now? How much is the other store selling eggs for? If you knew what they were offering this private price to a company, then you could underbid by 1 penny and get the contract instead. So even simple things like a price chart would be confidential, and that would be espionage, and it happens all the time. Look at the video. I hope this link still works. There's actually some pretty cool things on how devices are able to get data out of networks. Just remember, your data is irreplaceable, and some of it can be recreated, like the Word document for your English class, but a lot of it cannot exist again. It was a moment in time, and family photos are usually the #1 issues. Videos and photos are considered the most valuable things that people lose because they cannot get that memory back. They cannot get that vacation back. So those are valuable files, and they are worth backing up twice. Keyloggers are fascinating ways to track what people are doing, and they can be either hardware or software. This image is actually a hardware keylogger stuck into a very old computer, so it's an old image, and you just put it in between the keyboard itself or whatever input device. Just remember, it could be a stylus, could be a mouse, there are different input devices, and if you have any kind of hardware in between, you can grab all of it. The software one is sneakier, and that's what your lab is. So the software one looks at the keyloggers, but also can take visual images of what websites they've been to. Those are mouse clicks, remember. So you could be clicking through surfing, and your keylogger is grabbing images. Keyloggers can transmit data back, so they can send data to the mothership, or it can be replayed, so I can go to the same website you were at, and I can surf through all the keystrokes looking for the combination that was the password. That's how those would work. Once you're in, you can get all the information, and they're not easily detectable. Alright, so take everything that you've learned from all this stuff and look at your home network, including your driveway, how easy it is to get into your house, get into the fence, get into the front door, who checks the front door at night, when was the last time someone checked that the windows were locked, when was the last time someone backed up the data. All of that is relevant to having a secure home network. It's physical security as well as your data. When was the last time you changed your Wi-Fi password? And how many other people know it? Is your guest network even visible? So could I get the password from one of your old friends and then sit in your driveway and take your network? Use your bandwidth? So think about those things. Okay. Email me if you have any questions. I'm available by email or on Teams. And I want to thank you for looking through all of this. Thank you for your time. Bye.